Welcome to the June 2023 Power BI Dev Camp. So this month we're going to be talking about Power BI embedding best practices with client-side code, with the Power BI JavaScript API. So we got some great stuff to talk about as we go through. Now, a couple administrative points before we get started. One is there'll be different demos that I'm showing on this session, and I'll point to previous sessions. Remember that there's a portal, powerbidevcamp.net or www.powerbidevcamp.net, and there's a page for each session, that summarizes the links for resources that you can get to, and also the videos will be there for sessions where we have the recordings available. Now, second thing is that earlier this year, I did session 32, and I talked about guidelines, but a lot of those were with server-side code and what we do with the Power BI REST API. So this is going to drill down into the client-side code aspect, programming with JavaScript or TypeScript. Now, I also want to point out in session 32, I covered token management and kind of dealing with embed tokens that have effective identity RLS. And then we also talked about monitoring usage, and all those kind of build on the client APIs. So we're not going to rehash those, but instead we're going to go through, a set of different issues and kind of move from the ground up, but move pretty quickly. What are the basics of writing the client-side code that runs in the browser, that basically creates and manages your Power BI embedded sessions. Okay, now there's a couple of different demos that I'm going to be working with during this session. What I'm going to do is let's just go ahead and run this application just to give you a sense of what it does. So back here, we'll get to this project right here, and this is just available for download in GitHub. There is an app settings that has things like GUIDs for your Azure AD applications and for the identifiers of the workspace and reports. But the idea with this application is I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you what it does. It's going to create a set of files. So if I go down here and we go down into Power BI Embedded Scratchpad, there's this live pages folder. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete everything inside there. Because when I run the program, it's going to rebuild pages inside there. So what we'll do is we'll come back up here and we'll kind of set this thing to false. And when I run this C#.NET 6 console application, it just kind of goes through this process of, basically creating a page, and then also, adding in a minimal set of JavaScript libraries. Basically it's jQuery in the library that we're going to talk about right here. And now one more thing that we can do here is let's go back to live pages, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this with Visual Studio Code. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to be basically creating these pages right here. And kind of the magic of this application, being a scratch pad, is that it creates pages and just saves them to your local hard drive. But it puts in an access token that's good for an hour. And so what I can now do is I can come up here and I can go ahead and run this page right here. And what we should see is that kind of gives us the basics of embedding. And what I wanted to do in this session, and one of the reasons I wrote this sample, is that sometimes you don't want to think about the server-side code. You just want to have a starting point of everything the server-side code or the web API had to give you. And now we're just going to focus, on the basics of the client-side API. Now, note that with this, let's go back to the application one more time. And maybe this time I'll go to this page right here. And now I'm going to say launch in browser. Okay. And the idea is that not only is this going to, create the page and start it up, it's also going to open it up, for you inside of the browser. So it just kind of automates testing. Let's do one more thing here. I'll go ahead and we'll stop. And just to give you a sense of this, let's go ahead and, undo the comments for these first three. And, as I run this, it just kind of creates these pages. And, here we're going to have them brought up. And, once again, if we look behind these, this is going to be the JavaScript, that we're going to be, looking at. particular examples. So we'll just be able to come back here, take a look at this, even make small changes, and start, basically save the JavaScript and then go back and simply refresh the browser. Okay, so that is demo one. Sorry for that inaccessible GitHub time we spent there. A quick look at sample two, we're also going to be looking at is that this is another application that we can run with Visual Studio. And with this application, what I'm going to be able to do is illustrate some bigger picture things that we can do with the client-side code. And what you'll see is that each one of these links points to a different page, and each one of these pages, if we go back to this application right here, has a simple set of TypeScript behind it. Once again, just trying to make these kind of samples very concise and easy to follow. Okay, so both of these samples are available for download, and I'll just, as you'll see, I'll just keep demonstrating, from both of these as we go. Okay, now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to start just by covering very quickly some of the fundamentals of embedding. We're going to talk about initializing an embedded session. So what are the things that we do, as the report or whatever other type of embedded artifact it is kind of loading into the iframe. We're also going to talk about providing interactive behavior. So if you want to give the users of your application the ability to change, how you're viewing the report, you want to give them different navigation. We're going to cover that here. We're going to talk about using Power BI embedding and opening up reports in edit mode or in create new mode. We're going to talk about dynamic report binding toward the end. That's a really neat topic. And then finally, sometimes as you're writing client-side code, you get to the opinion of you can't get there from here, without some support where your client-side code, can call to a custom backend API, a backend web API, because then you're running server-side code. You can do things as service principal, that you might not necessarily be able to do from client-side code. Okay, so the big picture, and here's just a quick diagram I showed at the beginning of so many different sessions talking about Power BI embedding, because the idea is that your application, it has to be browser-based. Everything works, inside of an HTML document when we're using Power BI embedding. And we're going to have to talk to the Power BI REST API. So one thing we have to do is we have to go to Azure AD and go through some type of authentication flow to get an access token. Then we call to the Power BI REST API to do things like maybe create an embed token or get extra metadata about what's in a particular workspace. But after we've been able to get the metadata and some type of a security token, we pass that back to the browser. And here's where we focus on the code, for this session. And that is we use the Power BI JavaScript API. And the idea of this is that you have some div in the HTML page, and this library allows you to point to that div and call a bunch of methods. And behind the scenes, it does the magic to create an iframe. And with that iframe, it points the source back to the Power BI service. And what's kind of really nice about, all these pieces is that after we do the connection, basically your custom application has a report with a direct connection back to the Power BI service. So as someone's navigating between pages or they're clicking on slicers to, redo queries, all that's just direct interaction with the Power BI service in the back end. Now, what we're going to be talking about is writing client-side code against a particular API. So I've always called it the Power BI JavaScript API. There is a Power BI library, powerbi.js. Some time ago, folks didn't think that name was sexy enough, so they came up with the Power BI Embedded Analytics Client APIs, which is basically just a different name for the same thing. I guess one's Marilyn and one's Norma Jean, just two names for the same thing. But that's what we're going to be looking at. And, if you go and follow this link right here, what you'll find is that, here's the first place you should look. If you're looking for Microsoft documentation, and now I can drill down into different samples and different guidance inside here. Okay, now let's differentiate between two different types of embedding. There's user owns data embedding, used within a large organization. People have pro licenses. We want to leverage those. And when we do this, we basically use an Azure AD access token that basically is associated with the current user to do things like call the Power BI REST API and to embed the report, so that Azure AD access token gets passed back to the browser, and there's a way to kind of initialize the iframe so it gets pulled inside. Now, there's also app owns data embedding. So ISVs or larger, customers using embedding want to reach their customers, and they don't want to get user licenses. They don't have the ability to get all the users, into Azure AD with organizational accounts, as is required with user owns data embedding. So for this style of embedding, you basically call the Power BI REST API as a service principal, or possibly service principal profile. And when you call, you basically say, I'm a privileged, identity, but yet I need to create an embed token for a user. And so what happens is that someone has to write code to create embed tokens, and we hard code the report IDs, the dataset IDs, and the workspace IDs inside the embed token. So basically, it basically carries permissions along with it. That makes these two things, very different. We're not really going to talk much about generating embed tokens, but it is a very different, style of embedding. And as we go through, you're going to see that there's different capabilities. There's some things you can do with user owns data embedding that aren't supported. So remember, user owns data embedding. Power BI can always see a user identity with an Azure AD, work a school account, either an R tenant or a B2B tenant, and we know that user has a Power BI license. With app owns data embedding, Power BI really doesn't know anything other than it's an external user. Now, what we see is that the main difference between, getting a report up and going with user owns data, versus app owns data is that access token is an Azure AD access token. And so we have to add the token type as Azure AD. Okay, now, we also have, app owns data embedding. And here, we get past an embed token. And the embed token is something that server-side code is generated and passed. You can't really look inside of it. It's encrypted. So you basically just kind of take it as, some opaque blob that you're simply going to pass through. And, it basically gets, during the initialization of the iframe, it gets passed inside the iframe. Now, one more big architectural understanding that you need, is why we have asynchronous methods. So the way things work is that your custom app, runs in some internet domain, app1.mydomain.com. And so your page starts running JavaScript. You have your embedding data, and you call powerbi.js. And so what happens? It creates an iframe. And then what happens is that iframe, basically gets filled by something from app.powerbi.com. And the important thing to see is that your JavaScript runs outside the iframe. And due to cross-domain scripting constraints, you can't write any code in JavaScript that reaches into the iframe and adds CSS or does anything, with the document object model. Instead, there is a very, complex architecture. And I won't go into a lot of the details, but the idea is when I embed a report and I get this object, it's really this proxy object that I call into, and it has kind of marshalling logic to be able to kind of move commands back and forth. At the end of the day, there's some low-level plumbing, using, HTTP, ways to move across domains. But it effectively gives you a set of actions, which are methods, so that you can do something to a report, switch between edit mode and view mode. And there are also events, so you can write JavaScript code that gets triggered in response to an event like loaded or page change. Now, if we look at the first demo, let's go back over here. And what I wanted to kind of show in this first demo right here is that if I start up this application, and this code is going to run right here, what happens is that I get a report object back. And a report has this one particular object, which is the allowed events collection. So it's just a set of strings, but what we're able to do is, let's go to this page right here, and, you can see my code runs, and I've just basically looked at the list of events that are supported. There's some events here that are new, things like blur and info, but now we've kind of registered each event with an event handler. And then, this demonstration is mainly for discovery. So let's say that I'm using Power BI Embedding, and I know that there are different event handlers that I can, write JavaScript code that responds to user actions, but I'm not sure what events to use. So what we've done is we've said, hook up an event handler for all these, and just basically do a console.log and say what event it is. So the way that you could use this, would be to, say what happens when I click on a slicer. You get a data selected event, followed by a visual clicked event, followed by selection change, followed by render. What happens when I navigate from one page to another? So once again, you can see that, using this technique will allow you to explore, your particular reports and, maybe choose what type of event. And, once you see an event, there's going to be some kind of, detail down here, about, if you've navigated to a new page, what is the page you've gone to, things like that. Okay, now let's keep going through the slides. So I wanted to kind of show that first demo, just to give you a good idea of event handlers. Also, when we start working with this API, you're not calling across the network, but you are calling across domains. So for that reason, they've created all these methods as asynchronous. And so let's say that if we look at kind of the code on top here, I'm going to handle the loaded event. So as the report's loading, I want to run some JavaScript code to do something. And so I'm going to call report.getPages. But getPages is asynchronous. So the old school technique would be to call .then, and then to have an anonymous function that runs inside there. Okay, just to make sure everyone's kind of up to speed, what we now have in JavaScript that's supported, is async and await keywords. So the idea here, is that if I have a function and I define it as async, then I can simply use the await keyword, and then this runs to completion and just kind of turns back, the thing that I'm looking for, which is pages. So if you're not using async and await, in your JavaScript code, it's highly recommended. It's just much more readable, and your code is much more maintainable. Okay, moving on. The next thing we're going to talk about, is initializing an embedded session. So as an example, let's say that we go back here, and what I want to do is I want to go back to where we have this code, and here's some user owns data. Let's go ahead and open this thing up, and we can kind of talk through embedding, but just to kind of give you a sample of this is, if you look down here, there's this one thing I'm trying to call out at the bottom. It's got kind of the zoom. This whole bar across the bottom, is what we call the status bar, and it's not there by default. So let's go ahead and kind of set this to false. And here's what I mean about kind of quick testing, and that is now I can come back here, and this is just JavaScript executing and I see the resizer down there. I hit refresh and now it runs. And now we kind of see the default setting here. So you're not going to get that by default, in your reports, but if you would like that, we can go ahead and, set that and go ahead and run that. And I run it one more time, and all of a sudden, the status bar comes back. Okay, now with that, let's go back and kind of talk about adjusting the size of the embed container. Now, there's this issue that so many developers run into, as they begin to work with Power BI embedding, and that is, there's my div container. Let's go ahead and I get the report embedded, but now the report's 1 inch tall. And that is because there's nothing that's going to automatically adjust the height of the div container for you. And however big it is, they're going to try to adjust to that. So if you look at kind of all the samples we're going to look at, at the, very bottom, they have this code right here. It's a little different depending on whether there's a toolbar. It is very low tech, but the main idea with this, is, as things get large and small, we want, things to conform to that. So here you can kind of see that, as you make things bigger, as you collapse things, it's going to automatically adjust. And once again, the only thing I'm really doing here is I'm adjusting the div container, automatically, to basically occupy all the real estate that I can, in that particular window. This is a very simple example, which is just using jQuery, but whether you're using Angular or you're using React, you're going to need something similar, basically just to keep adjusting the height of your div container, something like 3/4 of the width, is typically standard. Okay, now that you have seen that, let's keep going. And I wanted to kind of point out that there are a bunch of panes: filter, bookmarks. Filters and bookmarks are panes that can be shown and hidden while the user's in view mode. The other panes really only make sense once you take the user into edit mode. But you can make decisions about how the report gets brought up and which things are expanded, which things are hidden versus shown. If we look at this sample application, and I've got 2 samples running, which is a little bit confusing. Okay, let's go back here. Let's unconfuse Ted. Okay, one more time, we're going to run this. And what I kind of want to show, with this one is that, not only can you set panes, whether they're showing or expanded or not, during initialization, you can also change them after, the fact. So if you start this app and, you go to number 2, you can kind of see that here, we have the bookmarks pane and the filters pane, so once again, your application could just kind of give them, the ability to change those. Also through the API, we can change, there is a fit to page, versus fit to width. I come back here and I make that all white, and now we come back here, what I kind of want to show here, is that if I make this small right here, and I go to actual size, versus fit to width, versus page width, and so giving, the user the ability to change this, through your application, just like it could change that if they were using the Power BI service, gets to be a nice touch to be able to provide. Okay. Now, I also wanted to kind of call out that there are some features that are only supported with user-owned data embedding. And in particular, we have, persistent filters enabled is what allows you to use user-owned data embedding and for the user to be able to, either capture and to reload persistent filters, and also, personal bookmarks. Now, what you'll see here is that if you're going to use either of these features, persist filters or personal bookmarks, you have to, in your access token, get one extra permission that catches some people off guard, and that is basically the user state read write all permissions permission. Okay, and then there's also the action bar. The action bar is fully supported with user-owns data embedding, but with app-owns data embedding, it's supported in edit mode. And so, let's go back here. And what I'm going to do is, so we don't have to keep running this application, I'm going to uncomment this. And now I'm going to generate all the pages at once. So I don't want them to all open up. I just want to generate them. So let's go ahead, run this right here. And as this runs, we should be able to go back here and kind of see that, this application, is just kind of generating these pages right here. But if we kind of open, here's the user owns data. And what I want you to see here is that there is this thing, which is, the action bar. And that is something where we can use that in user owns data embedding, either, in view mode, or I can go into edit mode and it's still there. Okay, and now if we go back here and we kind of look at the same thing, but with app owns data embedding, you're going to see that with app owns data embedding, they do not, support the action bar in view mode. If I now go, into edit mode, now you can see it, and you can kind of get rid of it and add it back. There's a lot of projects I've worked on where, this action bar, does things that we don't like. In particular, if, there are some things, not so much in the app owns data version, but if I go back to the user owns data version and they're in your custom application, and I use some of these options, and some of the options that I can use, are going to kind of try to route me back to the Power BI service. Let's see, I'm having problems finding run right now. But once again, you can use, those action bars in user owns data embedding view mode, but they're not going to show up. Now, some of the other things that we can look at here is we just go through and see some of the other, options that you have. You can load something in with a transparent background. So if I come back here and now we'll go back to transparent background and we'll load this in. So once again, depending on what's transparent in your report, it's just going to be able to, let some kind of background image, show through. There's a solid background. There's the transparent background. Next thing, I'm just going to keep rolling through some of these. There is apply theme. Now, what is a theme? A theme is really just a JSON fragment. Now here I've created some very minimal themes. I'm sure you have great themes that are much better than these, but what I wanted to kind of get at with this demonstration is that, when I load this in here, I can either go with what's defined inside the PBX file with the report, if it has the default theme or another theme, or I can override the themes, and you can kind of see here that, you can be, anywhere and have the user change a theme. Maybe you want to change from light to dark. Now, when you look at this right here, note that you're really just kind of changing the theme as the report is loading in. You're not going to take the theme definition and save it back to the report. There's nothing that we have in any of our APIs that will do that. So the recommendation would be just to leave the reports, in a default theme, but then have your application, be able to dynamically load themes, on demand. If you actually wanted to change the theme in the underlying report, that's something that you'd have to do with Power BI Desktop, change the theme, and that gets saved back to the PBX file. And there's no current way to kind of, automate that. Now, the next thing we want to look at is that when you're using embedding, we also have contrast mode, for people who have visual impairments. And, due to your requirements for accessibility, you might need to supply this. You might just do it as a nice to have, but the idea is that it's fairly easy to, write the code for this. If I go back here and we kind of look at contrast mode, we basically just have models.contrast mode, and we're able to, basically write that, into the config. And, at the end of the day, let's go ahead and open this up and just kind of see a simple example where, here's my report. If you have someone with a visual impairment or, someone who just gets to see things a lot easier, you should test things in this contrast mode. And it just kind of provides you with, more support for accessibility. Okay, next thing we want to look at is something called phased embedding. Okay, now phased embedding is not a performance enhancing technique. Phased embedding is really something we do when we have this issue. And that is the report doesn't automatically do what I want it to do. So I want to do something before the user sees the report. So what would be common would be to, know a page name and you want to navigate to that page, or you want to set a filter based on, today or any logic you have. So the way it works is instead of calling Power BI embed, you call Power BI.load. And so when you call load, you get the guarantee that the loaded event, is going to fire. But there is then a responsibility. So when you call load, you have to handle the loaded event, and there's where you kind of do your work. So there's, for instance, code, which, does a, lookup on a page by name and figures out, what, not the friendly name, what the ugly name is. And then we kind of create some type of a filter date. And then we're going to set the configuration parameters you see at the bottom. And now we're going to call report.render. So the idea is that you do what you want and you call render, and then it kind of starts the rendering process. Okay, now while we're on this topic of phased embedding, let's look at white label loading. Now back here, here is the white label loading page. I'm going to poke that, and you kind of see that as this thing starts up. Let's kind of see this compared to another one. Let's go back to that last report, and I click this and look at this Power BI logo. Okay, not there for a long time, but the idea with phased embedding is that this is my application. I don't want to tell my customers I don't want to push Microsoft. So what we're able to do, with this technique is that you take the div, which is going to be the embed container, and you basically say display equals none. Then we're going to use, phased embedding. So we call Power BI.load. In the loaded event handler, there's where we're going to hide the HTML element that is kind of the GIF. And we're going to take the embed container and show it, and then call report.render. One thing I need to point out here is that if you're going to use this technique, you have to show the embed container in rendered before you start the rendering phase. So if you begin to render and the hosting div is not visible, then there are unpredictable and typically bad results that happen. Because many visuals, like the table visual, have high performance code. And if they, they detect, am I visible right now? And if the answer is no, they don't do the work. So basically, if you're going to use white labeling, make sure you, move the embed container into visible state during the loaded event before you call render. Okay, that was hard to get out. Now, there's also a technique which is called bootstrap. And the idea of bootstrapping, is that if you've got some time on your hands before you embed a report, one of the things that you could do is you could call bootstrap. And so what this is going to do is it's going to go to the div, which is the embed target, and it's going to preload in all the standard JavaScript libraries it needs to. Now, if you're just initializing the page and you have synchronous code that calls bootstrap then Power BI embed, that's not really going to save you any time. It's really, you kind of need something such as, I call bootstrap and then I call across the network to get the embedding data. And by the time the embedding data comes back and I start the embedding process, I've already got, the JavaScript loaded in. And your expectation is bootstrap, might save you, a fraction of a second, maybe more in a really slow machine. But I see some people saying, hey, my Power BI report, when I use Power BI embedding, it takes 20 seconds. Bootstrap is not going to reduce that, from 20, down to 10. If your report runs slow in the Power BI service, it's going to run slow in Power BI embedding. And, while I see a lot of, complaints that Power BI embedding has slowed the report, I've never seen that turn out to be the case. It's always data modeling. So the first thing is always go back to the Power BI service and look at the report, with the same filtering, with the same RLS. Okay, now that kind of brings us into this next discussion, of one iframe per page. Now, if I look at a lot of applications, for instance, let's say we go back to this application, and it's not trying to kind of embed multiple reports on one page. The idea is that, if you go from page to page, and in an SPA application, you wouldn't even be moving pages, but the idea is that you're never showing more than one report at a time. So when a user needs to move from report 1 to report 2, you basically target, the same div, and you don't leave both open. And that kind of leads to this rule of, strive for one iframe per page. Now, the other thing that I want to just take a moment to, deep dive into, is how pages really work. So let's say we go back here, we have this, simple page right here. It doesn't really matter which one. Let's open up our buddy Fiddler. And with Fiddler open, I'm going to go back and refresh this right here. And so when I have this embedded report, what you see here is that there is this first load phase, and that's a call to app.powerbi.com. And that's going to return a bunch of stuff. There's no benefit to looking through here, but if you're curious, it's just an HTML page that shows up, but it loads in different JavaScript libraries. And the idea is that this first, return document, is the load phase. And when that comes back, it gives us a security token. So if I look down here at, things that we're calling, I can see that, one of my visuals is calling off, through this URL. So the reason I kind of wanted to jump inside there is just kind of go through this explanation that when we embed reports, we have a loading phase, which is expensive. It has to bring back metadata and a security token. And once the loading phase is complete, it then starts the rendering phase, each visual, begins to execute its query. Now, when the rendering phase completes, that's when we have, the last visual has completed its query. Now, we, through our API, started kind of showing that there was this feature called embed a visual. And that's kind of led some people to some bad designs. So embed a visual is really embed a report, but only show one visual. So it has the same overhead of load. And so what we've seen, is that customers, and there's nothing wrong with thinking this, it was kind of a good thought, it just doesn't work with the architecture, but there's this idea of, I want to create a catalog so my users can take visual 1 and visual 2 and just drop it on the page. But if you're using embed a visual, you have the overhead of, 5 reports if you try to put 5 individual visuals on a page. So what we want to do here is just kind of, argue against embed a visual if your design, has you trying to embed that more than once on a page. Maybe 2 or 3 is okay, but what you'll find is if you embed a visual on a page loads in 2 seconds. If we embed 2 visuals, it loads in 4 seconds. If we, put 5 visuals on a page, it loads in 20 seconds. And there's just, so many concurrent, requests, for each one, it just doesn't scale. Now, one of the things that you can do, if you were looking for some design that you thought embed a visual was good for, you can use custom layouts, and we'll look at that. But here's the code I don't want you to use casually. So first thing is that you have to kind of go into the report, and you have to figure out, what the report or the page name is, and each visual has a name, and it's really hard to figure what those are. But it is possible to, do that. But once again, embed a visual, find once a page, maybe 2 or 3 times a page, but more than that, you're just asking for pages that are going to take, 10 to 20 seconds to load. Now, if I look back here, let's say we want to get the names of visuals a couple different ways. One way here, if I go back here, I have kind of the visual inspector. And so here, I simply have some code. If we look at the visual inspector, that is going to get pages and then get visuals. So the idea here is that if I look at this report, I just had a little JavaScript that ran and kind of enumerated page by page. And so now you can see that each visual, has a name and it has a type. It's not table. Table was the visual we had a couple of years ago that we got rid of and replaced with table EX. So sometimes, having this little, utility right here, is handy for me, because, there's not a lot of great ways to quickly go through, a report and find the visual names, that you want to bind to. Okay. Now, also, if I go back to this authoring and customization application, and we kind of look at, how, we're able to implement custom layouts. You can kind of see that, you can have a static layout, that kind of, uses names. I also did an example of not using names, but just enumerating through the visuals, to kind of give you, different perspectives of, how you might want to, do something instead. Maybe I want to show, one visual at a time. So there are different ways that you could do that. And, another big thing is that if you use custom layouts, then you're basically just, your requirement is to have a report page that has all the visuals you might need. And, it's not expensive if you have 30 visuals on a page, but you're only showing 5 of them. So if a visual, is hidden and there are techniques to hide them, with basically custom layouts, it's not going to run its query. But unlike embed a visual, if you embed 2 visuals from the same report and you click on one, it doesn't cross-filter the other. When you use custom layouts and you have 2 visuals from the same page, all the cross-filtering works just fine. Another, reason to use that. Okay, so once again, you might look into, either here, kind of hard coding the names of the pages, and also here, would be, a different way to. Let me go one more. Okay, so here's kind of a custom layout, where instead of using, the name of the pages, you're basically just enumerating through the visuals. And each time you use a custom layout, it's just a matter of setting the X and Y position, and a matter of setting the width and height, and either hiding it or showing it. So once again, if you were trying to use embedded visual and you find that you're trying to do something that just won't scale, look into custom layouts. They might give you, what you want. Okay. Now, I think I've showed this demo. So this is a demo where if you want to show just one visual at a time, great. Have an underlying page that has 15 visuals and just basically hide 14 and show one. X and Y are 0. Width and height are the same width and height, of the ghosting rectangle. And then you can just, go visual by visual. And as you go from visual 1 to visual 2 and visual 2 is shown, that's when it runs, its particular query. So once again, it takes a bunch of code to code this up, but you get a lot of control, and it's going to be far more efficient, and it's going to have the kind of the cross filter capabilities. Okay, now, a bunch of things we need to look at. One is navigation settings. So what you'll see is that if you have navigation settings right here, you can put it to a couple different states. So if we go back here and we go to 2, and you can see that here I have navigation to the left. If I go to bottom, this is what it is by default in app unstated embedding, and sometimes in user unstated embedding. So this is something where if you explicitly say put it up left, that's good. Other times you might want to take it off entirely because you have your own custom navigation scheme. Such as a case right here, where we automatically query the report. Now, let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So what we can see here, is that you either put the navigation on the left, you put it on the bottom, or you turn it off. And one thing about left navigation is that if you only have one page, left navigation disappears because a choice of one isn't really a choice. If you have bottom navigation, it will show one page. So just kind of keep that in mind. But here's kind of custom navigation, where I just want to discover what are the visible pages. And once again, if we go back, here and custom pages navigation, so here is a concrete example, of simply moving through, and discovering the pages, and then just kind of creating the supporting JavaScript code to create an event handler. And when someone clicks on that, we're going to be able to navigate to a different page. Likewise, if I would rather, do it based on, bookmarks, there is going to be the, bookmarks here, bookmark manager, get bookmarks. And with bookmarks, there is a grungy name to the bookmark, and this code, is going to track it. But at the end of the day, it's not that hard for us, to kind of create something, with the bookmarks, where now we just have something that says whatever bookmarks are there, I'll just show them to the user. And now report authors are free to add and remove bookmarks. And this is now kind of a generic, panel for moving around, inside of the report. Now, building on that, what we can do is, if you look at the, the other demo that I've been showing, it simply says, if you're going to use a custom navigation scheme, and sorry, I'm all confused at which browser I'm using. Okay, so I'll just stop and start this one more time. But what I'm trying to get at here, is if I just want to create a navigation scheme but have it outside the report, that's what we have right here. And once again, click on custom scheme, and now you can see this application just kind of feeds, all report pages that are visible. and any bookmark, it can find, as well. And now, the user is able to kind of go down and, make changes. Let's go to different pages and so on. Okay, now a couple other things. There is a bookmark play mode, so that if I go back here and I take my report and there's bookmarks, I can put it in this play mode just like I could in the service. This works fine with App owns data embedding. Now someone can just kind of click forward and it kind of shows the bookmarks down below here. So, it's a possibility that you would want to kind of give users that capability. And then going, one step further, here's the carousel. And so, what this code is going to do is, simply, wait 2 seconds and move to the next bookmark. So it's easy to write generic code. Let's go back here to the bookmark carousel. We'll go ahead and we'll open it up. And we're going to see that I'm just going to sit back, and, so this might be something that we, show, in our company lobby as customers are coming in, and I want to kind of show, 5 seconds a page or something like that. Okay. So once again, just automating it. There's nothing out of the box that does that, but pretty easy to, create something. Now, also wanted to kind of show a simple proof of concept here, with custom filtering. So here, we want to kind of give the, the user the ability, to have a custom filtering experience. And what I want you to see is that this custom filtering panel is outside the report. But as someone kind of clicks, on something, and, drills, into that, we're able to respond to that. So it also kind of gives you the ability to kind of, quickly create user experiences for filtering that you couldn't really do, in Power BI by itself. Or with some companies, we hear it's not so much Power BI can't do it. It's just that all our applications use a panel that looks like this, and we'd like to keep, continue doing that. Now, as we keep going through here, I think we're just going to go a little bit over today. I've got a little bit more time. One thing I wanted to point out is that, as you, write code with the Power BI JavaScript API to set filters and remove filters, there is a new method called update filters we introduced a year or two ago. There's older methods, set filters and remove filters, that are still there for backward compatibility, but always prefer update filters. If you look at, the problem with set filter is that you could say add filter B but remove filter A. So now with update filter, the first thing is filter operation. Do I want the filters I'm passing you to be added or to completely replace, or do we just want to remove all the filters? So update filters, is what you want. Okay, now it's also possible to add custom menu commands. And so, a quick example of that is if we go back to this visual context menu. What I wanted to do here is let's kind of add 2 different commands. There's a visual context and a visual options menu. Now, if I don't add a selector, it's going to add it to every visual and every type. So I just want to add this to the table. So let's go back here, and if I say open in browser, now if I go up to this table right here, hey, there's my custom menu command. Great. If I go, over here, it's not there because I've targeted it, just for table visuals. So it's possible to target just to a type, or there's actually another selector for a visual name. Now, in our case right here, what's the difference between, these two? This is the options menu. If I go here and drop it down, and if I go to a data point, like a row in a table, and I right click, that's the context. So once again, one menu that's scoped to the whole visual is the options menu, or if you want the data point, that's down here as well. Now, to handle those, it is the command triggered event. Okay, so if I come back here and just if we kind of do a quick explanation, of how this is going to work right here. If I come back here, you can kind of see that, that fires this event because it's kind of a top level visual command. It gives you the visual name, but there are no data points. But now if I go to New York and custom menu command, down here, now we should see, exactly, what are the, the different values that we have, for, what's inside of that table row. Okay. Now, if I go back here, visual commands, it's also possible to hide menus. So sometimes we don't want, to show a particular, export command. So up here, you can kind of see that here we're hiding things like export data, spotlight, drill down on data. Now, if I go back here, we have this custom export command. And I kind of wanted to kind of just show an example of, a useful application. And so here, I don't have a selector, so this will work on, any visual. But if I go here and I say custom export command, now my code's going to run. So the way that I've kind of written this is that the JavaScript runs and it converts the data into a CSV format, and then it just kind of downloads it, such that, someone could readily, open this thing in Excel. But right here, if we kind of look at the code in custom export command, this kind of shows, kind of how to set up the custom export command. And then down here, when the command gets triggered, we can figure out, what is the name of the page, the name of the visual. And now we're going to call this. And, this is an example of using the, export data, which allows you to kind of pull the data out. And then there's some kind of sticky code here that kind of puts it into a CSV format and kind of adds the, anchor link behind the scenes that automatically, triggers the download. But once again, some kind of neat things that we're able to do with client-side code. Okay, let's keep going through here. One more thing in this section I want to cover, and that is the hyperlink attribute behavior. Now, what is this all about? So if I have something, such as this report right here, and if I go to custom hyperlink, and we're going to open this up. And as I open this thing up, I want to go to this one particular page. And here I kind of have, something that was configured, as a link. And the default nature is if you click on that, it will navigate to the link. So now what we're able to do is we can set that, to navigate. That would be the default. Navigate and raise event, or a little bug. This is raise event, not razor event. But the idea is if we have raise event here, look what we can now do. We can put a little event handler down here. So now if I kind of show the console window right here, and so now someone clicks on that, and what we should see is my code fires. So can you do something down here where you have links? Someone clicks on one of these links, and all of a sudden your code runs and hands you the link. Is it a call to a web service to update something? So I think there could be some creative uses of, kind of having this just be kind of a way to dispatch commands from the report to your JavaScript code. And I'll kind of let all of you kind of come up with creative uses for that. Okay, now, here's a question. Can we apply custom fonts in these themes? And the answer is yes, you can apply custom fonts in the themes, but whether they'll work, is a different matter. So Power BI can only support the fonts that are already installed, on the user's machine. So if you use a font that is not installed on a user's machine, it basically falls back to something else. So people ask, can we get the Power BI report to install the font or to use kind of the font, pull it from a web internet URL? And the answer is unfortunately no. That does not work today. Okay, now a couple more sections we're going to go through. One is embedding reports. I'm going to go through this first part pretty quickly because I've covered this in other sessions, but we can open a report in edit mode, or we can switch into edit mode after the fact, just by switching report switch mode. Also, one of the things that I'm able to do, is to perform a save operation. So a user basically opens the report in edit mode, makes a change, and if I'm using app owns data embedding, when I added the report ID to the embed token, it has to have the allow edit set to true, or the user won't be able to save things back. Also, if you have a save as operation or you create new reports, your embed token has to have the workspace ID. So if you have a embed token with a workspace ID, the workspace ID allows you to create new reports. So it could be create from scratch or do a save as operation. Now, also, people kind of ask about my report. When I drop it down, I want them to save, but not save as, or vice versa. So just by setting your permissions in the report configuration, is basically what determines, whether they'll have save and or save as operations. Now, another thing we have to worry about is the save as redirect. So, the idea here with the save as redirect, let's go back here and let's start without a save as redirect. So here, I have this brand new report that we have opened up. And so, let's say that we do something simple, sales revenue, per year. And now we come back in here and we do a save as, and we say test. The problem is you've just created a new report, but you don't have that report open. This is still a new report. So if I make a couple more changes and do a save as, as test 2, and I come back up here, there is no save because you've never saved the report. So one of the things, that we have to do is we have to kind of, whether it's a new report or an existing report that we're doing save as on, here, what you're going to see is that when someone saves the report, we have this event handler called saved. And so what then we're going to do, let's go ahead and open this up inside the browser. Let's, quickly create our most excellent report. And now that we've created the report, we'll go ahead and do a save as, and we'll save this as the name Frank. And so, what you can see is the save event is executing, and it passes you, what is the name of the new report? What is the, the report object ID? So, what we're able to do, at this point, is to, basically say, well, the report ID I had, well, there was no report ID before the new report, but here, what we're able to do, is just basically to figure out, what's the configuration for this new report and to explicitly embed it. Okay. Now, user owns data. Everything can be done on the client because basically the event happens and the new ID and you can embed it. And typically your user is going to have permissions on the workspace, and we just created something new in the workspace. With app owns data, it's a totally different story. And the problem with app owns data is that you have an embed token, that has IDs in it. But when you create a new report ID gets created. You need that, but that's not in the embed token because the embed token was created before. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to, call to a web service API so it can give us a new embed token, that basically contains the report ID for the thing that was just created. And what you'll also see is that the saved event fires for both the save event and save as. So if you have, either scenario possible, we want to look at event detail, make sure it's save as, and then if so, load the customized report. Okay, now we've seen that. We can also use a custom save as dialog. And if I just do a quick demo of that, so you can, see what the experience looks like. So let's go to demo 4. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a save as. And so here, what we, are able to do, and I'll just go back and look at what's on the code, is we've said basically, use custom save as dialog. And that means when the user hits save as, basically run my code, but don't bring up anything else. So there is a event save as triggered. And the idea is that then you kind of bring up, this dialog right here. And this is just kind of a simple bootstrap dialog. And, now we have this, and where do you want to save it? And also here, I'm kind of showing that, it's possible to save, to a different workspace. In our case right here, we'll go ahead and hit save. And so, now it's going to open up, that report as well. Okay. So your code must display a custom dialog. So basically that's what I'm showing you there. So once you use custom save as dialog, if you don't add anything else, nothing will happen. But if you handle the save as triggered, bring up your dialog, and then when a user kind of clicks on the dialog, then you call report save as, to save that value back. Okay. And then also note that it's possible to save to a different workspace. The user opens the report in workspace A, but when you use a save as command, you simply point it to workspace B. And remember that if you're using app owns data embedding, you'll just need to make sure that the workspace ID for the target workspace, is in your embed token. Okay, I've already talked about embedding new reports. 2 more things we want to look at. I know we're quite a bit over here, probably about 10 more minutes is what we need. But this next section is really neat. And it's dynamic report embedding. And the idea of dynamic report embedding, is that I have all these different customer workspaces. And that is, I have a multi-tenant environment. And so when we started, we had one customer and one workspace, a second customer. Now, we might have hundreds or thousands of workspaces, yet we have a standard report. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to take the report and save it in each customer workspace. If I have 5,000 customers, if I want to make a small edit to the report, that means editing the report in 5,000 workspaces. So the shared report and dynamic report binding, is really handy for the case where we just want to update one report and have it affect, everything else. So the way it works is that when you have a config file, you're going to have an ID that points to the shared report, but then you can also have a dataset binding. Now, once again, as long as your embed token, has the correct dataset ID in it, it's going to open just fine. If you're using a service principal or a service principal profile, typically it will have full access to the customer workspace, but then you'll have to give that, the service principal or service principal profile for each workspace will need some type of access to the shared report. Certainly doesn't have to be an admin. If I go back here to our sample, let's go back and, just to kind of show this right here, what I'll do is I will comment all this other stuff out. This could be the last demo that I run, but we'll also say, go ahead and, give me, automatically bring this up in the browser. Okay, so as I do this right here, what you're going to see is that all three of these pages, are going to use, the same report. This one looks at data set 1. This one looks at data set 2. This one looks at data set 3. And it's not all that complicated. You can just kind of see that here, for each one, we pass its own data set. Got to make sure that the embed token, has the correct IDs in it. But now, what you'll be able to achieve, is just, a set of 20 reports that you're using across hundreds of customers, that now give you a single place, to be able to update. Okay. Last topic we're going to look at, and that's extending client-side code using custom web APIs. And generally, you'll find that as you're writing client-side code, behind, a web page to get Power BI embedding, you can only do as much as the Power BI JavaScript API allows you to do, or as much as your own custom web APIs allow you to do. So what you'll find is quite often to get a certain feature, working, your application is going to have to expose web API endpoints. So for instance, this one has something where when we do the save as redirect, because we've just saved a report and now we need a new embed token that has the report ID of the report that's just been created. I don't want to, have to post back. I just want to kind of use the, Ajax Web 2.0 style, call a web API, get back the data and refresh, the page. Also, what I'm going to show you here, is a example that uses custom bookmarks to do some neat things. Now, in our example right here, not only with a custom code, call back to the bookmarks controller, the bookmarks controller will store that, inside of a custom database. Now, I want to capture a custom bookmark. So let's do this. We're going to go back and, we're going to use the authoring application one more time here. And at first, we'll just, work with demo 7, which is going to be temporary. And, the idea here is that, gosh, I'd really like to go to, 2017 and Western, and now I want to capture this bookmark. So the first demo, we're just going to keep things in memory behind the browser, but this is going to be, Western, 2017. Let's go ahead and hit save. And now the user, wants to kind of put in his or her favorite settings inside there. So this is Eastern 2020. So the idea is that you want to allow the user to kind of create custom views on the fly, and then use those to kind of get back, to what they had before. So the way that this works, if we look back here at this code, is that we can add a, something that when it's time to create a bookmark, we're going to call the bookmarks manager capture. Now, when you take a bookmark, do you want to allow someone to, personalize visuals, as well? If someone's down here and they're kind of fooling around, with, the visuals, and they personalize it, do you want to allow them, to capture those type of things as well? And also, do you want to capture the bookmark for just one page or all pages? And realize that, your bookmarks, if you have, 20-page reports, could be a lot beefier, so setting all pages to false when you can, is definitely recommended. Now, when we capture a bookmark, the bookmark has a display name. The bookmark also has state. Now, here's what we're going to do at this point. We have to actually take these bookmarks and the state and store them in a custom database. So that's what we're going to do in this next demo right here. Now, let's go back. And if I now go to this database right here, I have a shared bookmarks. And what we should see, is that there's nothing in here right now. And now if I view data here, great, and data there, nothing's there yet. Okay, so now let's go ahead and we're going to run the application. And as we run this application right here, let's go here. And this time, let's go back here, and I'm going to remove everything. Okay, so now this user wants to, set some filters and remember what they are. So now we're going to say capture bookmark. Okay, and so, this is going to be Western and, 2017. Now, my application kind of gives the user the option to store this as a personal bookmark or saved as a shared bookmark. So now this user adds this one in. Let's go down now and say, well, the whole team's going to need to look at this one. So now we're going to capture this one, and this one is going to be, Eastern 2020. And so now we'll say save as shared. And what you can see here is that when we look behind here, we have this bookmarks API. And you can basically see that in our case, there is a post that comes in with our API, and we're able to store those bookmarks. I should be able to verify if I come back here and do a refresh. Okay, there's just a bookmark. There's the state, just this big string blob, that gives us what we need. There's shared bookmarks right here. Shared bookmarks are brought up for everyone, so we don't need the user ID. Personal bookmarks are just brought up for this particular user. So now what we have, is this ability for, users to add bookmarks just for them, and we're able to kind of add bookmarks, that are also shared across all users. And, arguably it's complicated design. We had to add the web service in there so we can call back, but that just kind of opens up, this capability. One extra thing that people ask for with AppOwn's data embedding is I want to have a report subscription so that once a month, I have someone send me the report. But with AppOwn's data embedding, users are external. Power BI has no idea how to send, things to them. So if I have this idea that, users, can get report subscriptions, something in my application, can then, record. Let's go back one more time here and, open up report subscription and view data. So the idea is that users could opt in here, but then you're going to need to have, your own kind of logic to move through this table and figure out, does this user want the PDF file for this once a month or, once a week or, something to that effect right here. Okay. So talked about, adding different bookmarks, and we can kind of see, why, a technique where you add in a web API and then you can then call from your client-side event handlers to your server-side code that has just so much more capability, to consume and do things with a Power BI REST API. If you look at the AppOwn's data starter kit, that kind of has the same example of the embed controller, but it also has a web API controller, for exporting PDF files, back to the user. Okay, so this concludes our session today, on working with, Power BI's JavaScript API. And next month, we have Rui Romano, who's going to come talk about the new GitHub integration and the pro dev mode we have inside of, Power BI Desktop. And month after that, we're going to jump into some new coverage of Fabric and talk about, how to get started with Python programming in Fabric notebooks. So hope everyone enjoyed the session. See you next month.